Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, public education advocates. It's the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we practice the pedagogy, the politics that are currently happening in public education. As always, I ask that you write your name in the comments and any questions and comments that you might have about the topic that we're discussing. I'm a longtime teacher, and so I like to have active participation if at all possible. So just make your presence known and make your questions known. If you listen later, you can still put your questions in because I'll get a notice and I'll respond back to your questions. So there's always an opportunity to ask Dr. Be Good around the topic we're discussing. Today, we're going to commemorate the fact that we are in our 1-year anniversary period of the pandemic. About this time last year, we were all doing the COVID scramble, so to speak, and we were trying to get meals to kids, devices to kids, online curriculum to kids. And at the same time, we were asking parents to become their at-home teachers while they were trying to oftentimes work from home as well. If you all remember, and many of you don't want to, but it was a time where we almost felt like we were in the twilight zone, right? This virus came out of nowhere. It was taking people down left and right globally. It started in China, spread out across the world, got to us by January, February, and then poof, by March, we were being asked to stay home for the first time ever. And so we have done a lot of living, a lot of learning in that 12-month period. And so I thought it would be apropos to bring on a family that we've had on before, and that is the Purkey family. Welcome, Jessica Purkey and Riley Ogle. And welcome to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, where we're going to ask you this time to sort of share with us, because you have not only lived through the COVID instructional environment, but you've lived in it in 2 different states. You started in Georgia, and then you ended up in December in Kentucky. And so let me start with some questions. First of all, welcome, Jessica, and talk a little bit. First of all, let's sort of review. Do you remember clearly, and Jessica Riley be thinking of the same time, do you remember that first week or 2 that we were asked to shut down?
I do. I remember sitting in the garage getting the phone call from the schools saying that schools were closed indefinitely for the rest of the year. So we were scared. We didn't know what to do or what was going to happen. So.
And Riley, do you remember that? Do you remember being told you can't go to school?
Not really.
Really?
Well,
that's okay.
Screaming with excitement, so.
You've had a lot going on in those 12 months besides just getting taller. So you started in Georgia in Warner Robins Air Force Base. Can you talk a little bit about what was happening? What was the school's response at the beginning, that first period of time, which would have been the 2nd semester of last year? And then we'll go from there.
When schools closed?
Well, the school closed, and then what happened?
So when they closed, we went to online, but it took a week or 2 to really figure out what was going on, how to use it, because even the school system was having issue on their end, where a lot of us couldn't even log in. So they probably went a couple weeks without any school instruction while the school district figured out what they were going to use, which was Google Meets, and how all the teachers and everybody had to learn how to use it because nobody knew how it worked.
Did they also go to Google Classroom?
They did.
Mm-hmm. Was that new to them also?
I believe it was new to most everybody.
Okay. And so, Riley, What did you think at first of doing school at home? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember. At first, I was actually really excited about it, but after the first couple weeks, I got bored of being home with her.
All right, and so most kids have that answer. No offense, Mom. And so, okay, so everybody's scrambling, right? Did you, Jessica, have to be an at-home teacher?
I did to 3 kids, and the husband was working from home too, so he struggled with his meetings and the kids being crazy and loud. So everybody at some point was very stressed out.
And so you have a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and you had them all virtual?
Yes.
Okay. And I think we had you on a podcast where you talked about that. So those were the early weeks. And towards the end of the semester, did you feel more comfortable? Do you remember? Was it still?
I think we were pros. We had finally had a good schedule down, a daily schedule with the kids, and my husband working from home, and who got on when, and things like that. So by the end of the year, we had a pretty good schedule going.
How did your 5 and 3-year-old do?
They did. My 5-year-old actually did a lot better than we expected. She is in an IEP program, so she has a speech therapist, some other special ed teachers that work with her because she had a speech delay. And we were worried that going from in school instruction to online was going to set her back. But luckily, we were given some great teachers who, even on their own free time, would FaceTime with her and work with her whenever they could. So
And
luckily, she didn't take any steps back. She did great.
did the 3-year-old have any virtual class?
He did not. His school closed down, and we just worked with him at home. And really, anything that my 5-year-old did, our 3-year-old did with her.
Okay.
Sometimes better than her. So.
Well, yeah, he's very anxious to copy his sisters and be as big as his sisters. So that's understandable. All right. So then you go through summer, you start the year, you're still in Warner Robins Air Force Base, hubby's in the Army. And so you start the school year. How did you start the school year in Georgia?
They started off going 5 days a week. And I mean, again, everything was new with the mask wearing, the social distancing. Some kids, they had the option, like I think everywhere, where if you wanted to stay home and do online learning, you could, or you could do in school. But we felt that in school in front of the teacher was better for our kids. So that's what they did. And they did that up until we left. So.
Am I remembering correctly? Because you were on a podcast shortly, I believe, after that school started. Raleigh, you were in school like 5 days or 7 days or something and had to be sent home?
Yeah.
Quarantine?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, Riley, how was school starting this year? You went back 5 days a week. How was that compared to being home?
It was really different because,
Why?
we got to go to school and we got to actually sit down in front of the teacher instead of our parents.
And see friends.
See friends. And I think we got better education.
And so then you got word that you guys were being moved by the Army to Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to Kentucky in December, right before Christmas. And then school, of course, started again in January of the second semester, but first semester for you guys there in Kentucky. What kind of response did that school district have towards COVID?
So when we moved here, the schools were completely shut down still. They were 100% online. When they went back after the Christmas holiday, they started a hybrid program. So they went by last name, I believe. So kids with the last name A to whatever were going Monday, Thursday, and every other Wednesday. and the rest of the kids were going Tuesday, Friday, and every other Wednesday. So 1 week for them, it's Tuesday, Friday. The following week is Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and back and forth. So that took some adjusting to and getting used to. And schools start an hour earlier here than they did in Georgia. So we were having
Wow.
to get up even earlier than what we were used to.
So Riley, what did you think of that hybrid when you first got there? You had been going 5 days a week, and now all of a sudden you had to go 3 days a week on 1 week and then 2 days on the other. What did you think of that at first?
I was kind of a little upset because I wanted to go 5 days a week because that's
Okay.
what I'm used to.
Mhm. And did the social distancing, did the map, wearing masks and stuff, was that any different than your Georgia school?
Not really.
Okay. So that response seemed to be, the same as far as COVID protocols and staying safe, right?
Hmm.
One thing I noticed between the schools was in Georgia, it was up to the parents to make sure we were taking their temperature before school. But here, the teachers do it while we're waiting to drop them off. They go car to car taking everybody's temperatures. And if it's above 100.4, they
Yeah,
won't
100.4.
let them go to school.
Okay. Well, we've done that. Yeah, we don't let them out of the car either. So Riley, was there a big difference in education between 5th grade in Georgia and 5th grade in Kentucky?
There's not that big of a difference between it.
Okay, well, that's good to know because there's really not supposed to be. 5th grade is 5th grade, right?
Yeah.
And so now I'm hearing, because I talked to your mom, and she says that you guys, after spring break, are supposed to go back 5 days a week?
Yes.
Next week,
Actually, next week.
starting Monday.
And how do you feel about that?
Now I'm a little upset that we're going back 5 days a week because I got used to going like 2 to 3 days a week, and then I actually got used to it and was excited just being home for like a couple days or 3 days. And now I have to go back 5 days a week. Wake up at 6 a.m. every single day of the week of school.
So what did you do when you were home the 2 days that you weren't at school? What were you doing?
Homework and stuff, and my sister also had homework, and I would help her out with her homework as well.
And so Olivia, your 5-year-old sister, had been also going hybrid, is that correct?
Yes.
Was she going the same days that you were?
Yes.
Okay, so that makes sense. And so how does she feel about going back 5 days a week?
She's excited. Any day they don't get to go, even in, was it February, they were home for 2 weeks during that whole winter storm that everybody had. And so they missed 2 whole weeks of school because of that. And she was mad. She did not want to be home. She wants to be at school. So
Okay, well that means they're doing something right at school.
yeah.
Okay, and just to be sort of asking those questions, you were at Title I schools in Georgia and now in Kentucky, and so everybody gets a free lunch and breakfast. Did they handle that any different in Kentucky than they did in Georgia?
A little different. In Georgia, you had to go, they had certain locations where you could go pick up lunches the days that when they weren't at school. Here, they actually, I believe they did the same thing, but now that the kids are doing the hybrid mode, they send home breakfast and lunch. So if they go to school Tuesday, they would send them home with food for Wednesday and Thursday. And then the same for Friday, they would send home food for Monday.
So that's interesting. That because it's interesting talking to people from other states that are part of a federal program that's not supposed to look different in each state, right? It's supposed to look the same. So it sounds like that's happening. It's happening in Georgia, happening in Kentucky. And that's the way it happens in Texas too. I mean, it doesn't sound much different than what we're doing here. And so that's fascinating to get a real report from the field that we have federal programs that are being carried out in really the same way, despite being different states. So that's interesting. So what do you think that this COVID year, what impact do you think this COVID year has had on you and your family?
Well, I mean, at first, I think it was just hard trying to get a schedule down with the kids and you know, the husband working from home, not being able to get on his meetings because you hear the kids in the background. But, you know, I think everybody had to figure out how to adjust. And, you know, like I told my husband when he would get frustrated with the kids being too loud was, you know what, they know you're home with your whole family. They need to also understand it's chaotic for us too. So,
Right.
But we did start to learn to get outdoors a little more so the kids aren't in front of electronics all day long. So we've been doing that here also with hiking and just getting out and doing some science walks and things like that with them so they're not sitting in front of the TV all day.
Do you feel like COVID has had a negative impact on your kids' education?
I don't think so. I thought that it would, especially with Olivia, who's on the IEP program, but she's actually, I mean, her teachers now here in Kentucky said if I had never told them that she was once a nonverbal student, they would have never known, because even her first day there, she got in trouble for talking too much, which is great. We love that. So, and Riley's teacher said she's right where she should be. So, and actually, she's actually doing a little better than most of the kids in her class. So I was worried it was going to, but it doesn't seem to really have had much of a negative effect on them educationally.
Well, that's good to know. And that probably has a lot to do with you being involved in making sure that they completed their assignments, got online on time, and all that, this COVID environment required parents to do. And so pat yourself on the back, and good job, Riley. Good job, Olivia. Hello, Mr. Corbin. And I'm sure Corbin will be glad to get back to school too.
Yes, he starts preschool in August and he's very excited. So,
well, good. Well, all right. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us and catching us up on what it's like to have a COVID year in 2 different states and 2 different school districts. So we thank you very much, and we'll let you go now. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
So it's been quite a COVID year, and so much has happened. It's amazing how things continue to change. And so one of the things that continues to change has been first of all, finally the change has been the opening the door to educators and school staff being allowed to get their vaccines. It's somewhat ironic that on the same day that the governor of Texas announced the fact that he was opening up the state of Texas again, he was doing away with many of the restrictions, especially around mask wearing. That very day, President Biden called on all states to vaccinate teachers by the end of March. And so that very day, Texas opened up the vaccines to educators. And that was perfect timing for my district, for example, because we were going on spring break the following week. And so many of our staff went ahead and used a spring break day to go get their vaccination. They were very anxious, many of them, to get it, and were happy to go during spring break. But let's see what's happening across the state on that. President Biden said that he was calling on all states to prioritize teachers for the vaccines, and that everyone should receive at least their first dose by the end of March. My challenge to all states, territories, and the District of Columbia is this, that we want every educator, school staff member, child care worker to receive at least one shot by the end of the month. He noted that more than 30 states had already approved that. And if you'll remember, 2 or 3 weeks ago on a podcast, I had reported that the numbers was up from 17 states to 27 states, and then it came up to 30 states that finally started prioritizing teachers for vaccinations. And so he was using the full authority of the federal government in directing every state to do the same. He did not elaborate on what authority that is, which I thought was sort of interesting, but it helped, because in Texas that very day we started getting word that we would be allowed to let teachers be next in line and not wait until their classification had been a couple levels down the road. So Biden has been under intense criticism by the Republican Party for not doing enough to urge schools to reopen, given evidence that they can do so safely with precautions such as mask wearing and distance learning. But, well, not distance learning so much, social distancing in this case, but in fact, the Centers for Disease Control said in a guidance last month that teacher vaccination should not be considered a condition for reopening schools, which to me is a little, it goes against what we had really, it doesn't make sense to somebody like me who sees teachers in front of, between 10 and 12 kids during COVID, but could be more later on. But whose kids, each kid comes from a family with other members in it, right, who are out and about, that we should not try to protect our educators. And again, when I say educators, anybody who's on the campus at the school, and not acknowledge the fact that our teachers were anxious about being in front of kids who actually represented many other people from their family, right? When they came to school, they were a funnel to others within their family, some who'd been out and about and possibly exposed, right? And then there were parents who were anxious, especially parents of color whose communities have been hit the hardest with COVID sickness and death numbers. So Biden acknowledged that we can reopen schools if the right steps are taken before employees are vaccinated. But time and time again, we've heard from educators and parents about the anxieties around sending their kids or receiving kids, in the case of teachers, without being vaccinated. And so, yet as another strategy to help accelerate the safe reopening of our schools, let's treat in-person learning like the essential service that it is. And that, right there, we should have done that in, as soon as those vaccines started coming out. If educators weren't with the healthcare workers, we should have been right after healthcare workers and not had to battle for priority in the line for a vaccine. So the school vaccination push comes as supplies of vaccines ramps up, easing shortages. And Biden also announced that the country would have enough doses for every U.S. adult by the end of May. So that's good news, right? That's good news. And so now we're talking about, okay, so how do we reopen? And many of you don't know this because you live in states possibly like Texas, like Georgia, that opened up schools right from the beginning to face. But there are many states still, California, Illinois, and New York, who have struggled in getting their teachers, their unions to approve going back to school, especially without a vaccine, right? And so here are 4 strategies for building trust, because a lot of our families, even once these school districts reopen, and many of them are supposed to open this week or and last week, just even to have the last few weeks of the school year face to face and start getting back to a somewhat more normal school environment, you know, we need to have our school districts show that they can build trust in parents, especially our parents from our Black and brown families, which again were disproportionately represented in the COVID-19 death toll, and feel more at risk. So the first thing that districts need to do, and I'm not only talking to districts, but I'm talking to parents who I want you to think, is my district doing this to gain my trust back? Communication and messaging, right? If you don't have a school that's doing a lot of communicating with you, holding Zoom parent meetings, sending out emails on a regular basis about their COVID protocols, how close they are to opening, or what they're doing to prepare for opening, you need to reach out to them. You need to know these things, because chances are, if you don't know the many things your district is going to do to open up and help your child stay safe, you're not going to want to send them, right? And so being able to provide a sense of security in the community is huge. And so districts need to have a communication vehicle around which they are communicating to you all about how they are proceeding with keeping your kids safe from COVID. So administering surveys, matter of fact, if you haven't gotten a survey from your school district, I'm going to find that very odd. We've sent out about, I don't know, 10 surveys? Lots, because we want to know. We want to know where parents' heads are, what their thinking is, what their trust level is. We need to know that. We want to know that. And so being able to send home a survey, and we've gotten, I mean, out of 1,600 parents, we've sometimes gotten 800 responses, which is unheard of. That was our last one. It was like, whoa, we have really gotten our parents to pay attention to what we're sending home, and to wanting to have a voice in what we're doing and saying, and wanting to plan. So we were blown away, because normally we get like, what, 150? We got almost 800 surveys back. Unbelievable. And it's important to communicate decisions in language that parents can understand. And that's not meant to be anything but an understanding that we have parents that come from second language backgrounds, parents who don't have as much education as other parents. And so keeping the language in those district emails, the school emails, very easy to read is part of our district job. And if you're feeling like you're not understanding what the emails are saying, don't take it personally. Contact the district or the school, depending on what the email says, and tell them that you're not understanding what this message says. And just be professional about it. Just say, hey, this seems to be a lot of educational gobbledygook, and I need this explained to me in a way that I can understand it better, because I am very interested in what is happening in my child's education in school and district, but sending me emails that I don't comprehend is not helping me, and I don't appreciate that. They need to hear that. Consultation across communities. So I'll give you an example of that. I am blessed. I happen to be bilingual in Spanish. And so when I have a district parent meeting through Google Meets or Zoom, then I do one night in English and one night in Spanish. That is, to me, that's to be expected. We are a predominantly Hispanic district. Many of our parents don't speak English, and yet they have as intense a need to want to know what's happening at their child's school as an English-speaking parent. And so we really, really work hard at sending home messages in both languages. Our Facebook page posts are almost always in English-Spanish. Our messages from school are in English-Spanish, and then our parent meetings are in English-Spanish. Our surveys are in English-Spanish. So making sure that we send communication in the way that our communities need it to be is part of our job. So, and then, if you have a community liaison in your district, see if that community liaison is having face-to-face meetings or Zoom meetings where you can ask questions. There's probably a topic involved, but there's usually an opportunity in the chat to ask other kind of questions. And so be that person to maybe ask the questions that other parents want to know the answers to, but they're too embarrassed to ask. We show that leadership, parents. So, and then be on the lookout for leadership opportunities with your school when they ask for parents to help them take part in committees and in other forums and so forth, to where they're asking for your input as parents. It is unfair often to complain about schools, especially those schools that have sought out parent information, parent input. You haven't given any. Is it fair to complain? Is it fair to complain when you haven't built a relationship with the school principal that you have? So think about that. And then mitigation measures need to be in place. And that is, we need to make sure that we have the protocols in place, not only saying that we do, but showing that we do. Your kids need to be able to, well, first of all, most districts, you come in the car or before they get on the school bus, they have to have their temperatures taken, because if it's over 100.4, most places they send you home and say, do virtual learning today if you have a slight fever. But that's a very visible first step in the protocol series. And then they get on the bus or they come to school in the car, they pass the temperature check, they go inside, they take sanitizer, put it on their hands, they grab their breakfast, eat in their classroom, they have more sanitizer opportunities. The misters are used. Kids probably see misters being used in different classrooms as when kids are out, but they can still see misters being used. Those are visual evidence that the school has taken the COVID protocols very seriously and are implementing them not only on a daily basis, but in some cases several times a day, where they clean door handles, they clean bathrooms, they clean the light switches, because that's where those germs tend to be more than any place. And so the more you do this, the higher the interest will be in families wanting to return. And then the fourth thing that your schools should be doing is being visible and available. So even if visible and available means having weekly or every other week meetings with Zoom or Google Meets, your school principal needs to be very visible. Your school superintendent needs to be visible, because the school needs to become and continue to be an asset to the school community and its families. And for example, I think an easy example to pick on are the school lunches and breakfasts. As Jessica Purkey said, on the hybrid weeks, they would send food home with the kids for the 2 days that the kids would be doing homework from home. And so there's that support from the school that they want their kids to continue to be fed even when they're not at school, to continue feeding those brains and those tummies of those growing bodies. But for example, here's another one. With the recent winter storms in Texas that were a couple weeks ago that caused water, power, and heat outages, there were school districts that offered to transport its families to neighborhood community centers. It also provided blankets for some families. I know that when we had that in the Dallas area, one of our schools had no power, but the other one in Plano did have power and heat. And some of our families, some of our staff were able to come and spend a couple of days there with microwaves, with heat, with running water, and they could bunk down in our classrooms that had rugs and know that they were at least a whole lot more comfortable in our school. And I believe I bought them dinner that first night so that we could send that message that we cared and that we were glad that we were able to provide the shelter for them. Because that sends that message that we will support you, families, and during your times of need, we will continue to support you. And guess what? Then, if we do that, you're going to feel more comfortable supporting us when we knock on your door, so to speak, or your telephone or your email, and we say, hey, Johnny isn't getting online. Hey, Jaquilla is not paying attention in class. You're more likely to pay attention to us and say, oh, wait a minute, darling, you need to pay attention to school. This is the school who has supported our family during tough times. You need to reward that by paying attention and doing your schoolwork. And so it becomes an intrapersonal relationship that the school has with its families and its family has with the schools. And that's the best kind of relationship that we can have in a school community. So again, we're talking about things that continually change this year. Well, here's another big one. The CDC is reconsidering the 6-foot student spacing guidelines in response to new studies. It's like, what? So the Center for CDC, for Disease Control, are reconsidering the social distancing guidelines for schools with universal mask wearing in response to new research suggesting that spacing students 3 feet apart instead of the 6 feet may be sufficient to ward off the outbreaks of COVID-19 when all other safety measures are followed. And so if the agency decides less distancing is still safe, it could save schools all sorts of space and staffing costs and reduce the number of students that are held in quarantine. And like it might not have to do so much hybrid, for example. The CDC guidance for school reopening that was issued in February stated that we must stay, of course, 6 feet apart from one another to avoid a risk of contagion from airborne droplets or aerosol coronavirus that it's in the air when people talk, sneeze, or cough. So students or staff who come within 6 feet of someone who tests positive for a total of 15 minutes or more within the space of 24 hours is also recommended to be quarantined, right? Those are things that we've been hearing now for almost a year. Critics have argued that the guidance makes it much harder to physically house kids for in-school learning. And so, I've been saying, you've heard me say this for almost a year, and frankly, I'm pretty good at predicting stuff and projecting ahead. And it's amazing to me that it's taken a year for them to figure out that no state's building calls for classrooms large enough to handle that kind of spacing 6 to 1, right? You've heard me say that. We can't fit. If every kid wanted to come back, but we still had the 6 feet social distancing, we would not be able to fit them back. We'd have to go to hybrid where 50% come one day and 50% come the other. There's just no room. So they say the guidance pushes more people than necessary into the 10 to 14 day quarantine, which they could, and where they could only learn remotely. We know that. So as soon as we put out the guidance, among the biggest challenges that we were aware of was the fact that schools were having problems with the 6-foot guidance, and that of course prompted more studies. And so, that's good, because what that's led to, it looks like, is that they're considering allowing a 3-foot social distancing. So, because right now they said that with the 6-foot social distancing, 30% of kids could not come back to most buildings. Now, it could be more, it could be 50%. It just depends on the type of building. They mentioned 30% in the article, and I'm thinking, not for us. I think we wouldn't be able to take 70%. But the World Health Organization already is recommending smaller physical distancing of a meter, which is about 3.3 feet. But there's been little research on how much of a difference it makes in infection risk to separate students by 6 feet versus 3 feet. There have been studies finding both benefits of distancing by 6 feet or more and risk from separating less than 3 feet, but the safety of distancing between 3 and 6 feet has been murky up to this point. But a study in Massachusetts released online last week ahead of the print edition of the Clinical Infectious Diseases suggests that schools can use smaller distancing safety if they strictly follow the other COVID protocols, like the universal mask wearing. Researchers tracked well over 500,000 students and 100,000 staff at 251 schools in Massachusetts over a 16-week period, and they found that among the schools where 100% of students and teachers and staff wore masks, that the infection rates were no higher on campus than a campus that used were no higher on campuses that used the 3 feet distancing than the ones that use 6 feet. So there was no change as long as the other factors were in place. Not only mask wearing, washing hands, using sanitizer, thermometer before coming in, right? So this is huge news, folks. Figuring out the right approach to distancing isn't just a matter of adhering to public health. Finances and logistics inevitably play a major role as schools grapple with finding enough resources to cover being able to welcome all the kids back, right? Schools could use some portion of the federal fund stimulus from the American Rescue Plan aid package for the school facilities repair and improvements to enable operation of schools to reduce the risk of viral transmission and exposure to environmental health hazards. But it's unclear whether school districts will rank that priority among many others, including addressing learning loss and providing summer school options. So some of you may have heard me talk before that the American Rescue Plan is supposed to be to put money towards lessening the achievement gap. And so it seems like we may have to have a sort of a double priority. One is definitely to put money in making sure that we have tutoring, that we have small groups going on, we have summer school going on to start working on the COVID climb, right? The more positive term, the COVID climb towards academic success. But we also need to put some money towards making sure that our classrooms stay safe by putting money into things like sanitizers, making sure everybody has a mask, making sure we have machines to put the fume stuff, in the classrooms to wipe down our doorknobs and our switches in our bathrooms. So it may be that we'll have to prioritize both ways. So Jonathan Travers, a partner at the consulting firm of Education Resource Strategies, has been working with school districts to analyze their physical space and determine the feasibility of opening in-person instruction. And one district has determined that reopening school buildings to all students while maintaining 60-foot distancing requirements would require 30%, here's where I saw it, 30% increase in space and staffing. Well, nobody has that kind of extra money or time to build that, right? And so given that the school year is almost over, folks, right? We're towards the end of March already. I don't know how that happened. Then nobody's thinking about doing that for the school year, right? And so districts found that 3-foot distancing, on the other hand, would be doable in the majority of its buildings without major changes in the number of students in a class group. Even there, though, some classrooms simply wouldn't accommodate the adequate numbers. So what that means is we did not have a set way that we do our schools, our classrooms, and so forth. We have different schools built in different decades of different sizes. And so we certainly don't have a standard by which we can say every single classroom in the United States is this by this square foot. We just don't. And so some of them are bigger than others. Some can take more kids than others, right? And so being able to figure all that out, luckily we have this time plus the summer to do several things. One is to get vaccinated. Kids are on the list to get vaccinated, but teenagers in the fall, little ones in January of this coming year. But it looks like most adults could be vaccinated by the end of May or so. And that gives us the summer to sort of build our herd immunity up and get us all more comfortable with being closer together. And I don't want to say not wearing our masks. That's not up to me. I know that when for example, in Texas, when the governor said no mask, there was a huge panic. I had teachers and staff members right away say, oh my gosh, are we going to let kids not wear masks? And I can't come to school. That's going to happen. It's like, no. And every school district that I know that very day sent letters to their staff and parents saying, we are not changing our mask requirement at this time. And so everybody settled down. But we have, that's one of those things that we'll look at. And we'll know more by August, right? Most of us start our schools in August. And so, for right now, what many school districts are doing is putting much of their budget in massive summer schools and tutoring initiatives, and hoping that the federal stimulus finds the way to our schools. A lot of times our state governments will keep the federal funds and plug up some other holes with it. That happened in 2011. And so we're hoping that won't happen. There's already a push to our legislators to ask them not to do that, so that the schools can actually be the receivers of the funds and be the decision makers on how to best use those funds to prepare schools for the fall and to prepare kids with their COVID climb during the summer. So lots going on, as you can feel. And again, short period of time, right? And yet here we are, we're in spring break, and many of us are forgetting what happened during Thanksgiving and what happened during Christmas, where there were spikes, right? There were spikes in in COVID because people got together with their families. And so what are some districts doing? Some districts are going to try to figure out how to mitigate the spring break possible spike by closing some schools down. Some are hoping, like we did, that the majority of staff is getting vaccinated with their first shot during spring break, and in some cases that's happening. But so other schools are asking travelers to quarantine. If you've gone anywhere, stay away from our schools for 14 days. And of course, many schools ask their teachers not to go overseas. Of course, many European countries are still closed to international travel, but it's, there have been different responses from different school districts, and some aren't setting any rules. For example, the principal of Pottsgrove High School in town in Pennsylvania said his district isn't discussing setting its travel restrictions. So he's just hoping that families are smart. And he says, I think our community has been very responsible throughout the pandemic, and we're hoping that that will continue. So it'll be interesting to see how your school district responds to the COVID spike that may or may not come. Hopefully it doesn't. So, again, we're asking people to use common sense, and most of us are lucky that we have families who do that. So as we wind down our hour together, let me revisit what's happening. Because as we are talking about vaccines, as we're talking about schools reopening across the country, as we're talking about how to mitigate the spring break possible spike, we have things going on in most of our states as far as legislative sessions. And so I'll use it as the example. Our legislators are in their, I think it's 150th day. No more bills can be submitted. And now it's time to prepare ourselves to do public comment and to possibly go in front of the hearing committee for certain bills. And so if you've not learned how to figure out how to look at your bills, just Google it. You can do a couple of different things. Google who your legislators are, first of all, and reach out to them and say, hey, tell me where you are on the education bills that are being presented, and have them tell you. But if that's not quick enough, because some will answer faster than others, you can go and Google what bills are being considered in your legislative session, and then you can find the educational ones and start reading them. Try to get through some of the legalese, but they do try to write them in English because they do want public comment. And be alert. Get on listservs that will alert you, because every bill has a listserv that will alert you. It will notify you when something's coming up with it, whether it's public comment, hearings, whether the subcommittee is meeting, and get involved. And not only that, but if you get good at that, get your friends, ask your principal about it, ask your PTO and PTAs about it. Get them involved. Matter of fact, now that I think about it, I think I would ask my PTA, PTO presidents to keep my school community alert on any school bills and put that on them. That would be interesting, because guess what? PTO, PTA folks are getting alerts on pub ed bills as part of their office. And so use them as your conduit. So why am I doing this? Let's revisit that real fast, because I always want people to know why I'm spending time every week with you, bringing you the current events in public education. Why am I doing this? Well, not only is it the right thing to do, because frankly, all of us should be interested, even if you don't have kids. If you don't have kids at all, if you don't have kids in home anymore, if you don't have grandkids, you still need to know all this, because this impacts your future economic bottom line. It does. If we're not educating kids successfully now, they will not graduate to be successful, high-paying tax citizens. They will be graduating to hourly wage jobs that do not pay in a lot of taxes, which means our cities won't get a lot of money to fix roads and sidewalks and parks. And just, there's so many domino effects. So let's just fix it where we know is the right place to fix it, and that is in our schools. I'm going to save some more of that for another show, I'm going to thank you for being on today. I'm going to hope that you are leaving a little bit more knowledgeable about public education, a little bit more interested in knowing more about public education as we go forward. And if you have questions, remember, put them in the chat. I'll be happy to get back to you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.